Osmeloski from Search Engine Land. For those of you I haven't gotten to meet, I just got to meet some of my panelists in person just now. I'm also a local, and I feel almost as cool as Marty for taking over the Twitter stream for like a second there. So, so I'll get there one day. So again, as a local, we are so happy that you guys are all enjoying Park City, and hopefully we're going to get some good snow after you all leave. So we'll have the slopes back to ourselves. So this panel about performance display is kind of an interesting new area for me to learn personally, because I've come from the organic search side for a long time. And our panel is pretty exciting because, again, we have another local, Tony Zito, CEO of MediaForge. So pretty excited to meet him. And Roger Barnett.
John Kelly.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to get this. No, you're Roger Barnett. Look at that. John Kelly of VP at Criteo. And James Green of Magnetic. And Roger Barnett of Ignition One. So glad you all could join us. So kind of what I want to hear from each of you, what's your company's unique approach to display? Just to kind of kick off the conversation.
Yeah, I'll get started. This is John Kelly with Criteo. For those of you who don't know us, we're the world's leading retargeting company. I think one of the ways that we approach this as being unique is that we charge solely on a CPC basis. So only when people come to the site do advertisers pay for us. And that creates efficiencies and predictability that are pretty rare in the display field. But we're also doing this at a significant scale. It's not just a small portion of budgets. We're able to get return on ad spends that are very similar to search. And we're able to do this at a significant scale so that this can actually move the needle for the advertisers.
So we basically do search. We're a search retargeting company. So we'll take your search queries and save them, cookie you. And then when we see you somewhere else, we'll display an ad, a display ad, based on what you've been searching on. So the performance we see is very, very similar to search. So I would definitely answer yes to that question.
Okay. Roger?
Ignition One thinks about display as part of the ecosystem of performance marketing alongside search and Facebook and other channels. And for us, it's all about the user, understanding what the user is doing with your media off your website and on your website, and making sure you target them the right ad at the right time and paying the right amount for it.
MediaForge is a performance display company as well. We approach the market from a slightly different angle. We don't focus on clicks, we don't focus on impressions, rather we focus on engagement and the measurement of how engagement affects performance ultimately. So a slightly different approach to the market, but we focus on retargeting and then as a core, but we also do search retargeting and email retargeting as well.
Okay, awesome. I mean, I think one of the key things that we've seen as search and display has had pretty significant growth. It's kind of resurrected the idea that highly targeted display performance can be achieved. How have performance display advertisers really been able to leverage the data that they've learned about their users from search? How are they bringing that forward into performance?
I think it's a combination around technology investments and measurement and advertisers understanding how valuable the holistic approach is, understanding the value of views and clicks across search and Facebook and other forms of media, because it all does work together. And just like Marty was talking about the value of impressions on Facebook and how that impacts brand searches on Google, which ultimately lead to conversions, it does all tie together. And so the fact that there are several platforms that have been able to do this efficiently for marketers, to get them the tools to see and understand that. And I think marketers' mindsets have shifted where they don't look at each digital channel in a silo anymore, because they understand that users engage with media across multiple channels. Those are the things that have really driven performance display over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say John wants to jump in there.
Yeah, I think if you look at search, and it's kind of done three things in the marketplace which has been really significant. One, it's got a very clear value proposition. You know, we're going to take a user's intent and put advertising, targeted advertising against that. Two is a very clear business model. We're going to pay only when somebody clicks. And then three, you've got the ability to adjust your pricing based on the ROI that you're seeing. I think if you look at what is happening in performance display, you can do all three of these things. So you take exactly the intent of the user. It's very similar to, they're not typing it in, but they're actually demonstrating this intent to you in different ways. kind of like dating. Don't necessarily have to listen to what somebody says, but listen to what they do, right, to get their intent. So when users are on the site and looking at products, you have a pretty good idea that they're interested in those products, right? Then you take the clear value proposition of saying, hey, listen, we don't need to pay for brand uplift or for other things. We could just pay for a user that comes back to the site. And then the ROI, you've got the ability to adjust pricing, right? You can change this pricing based on categories and products and users and all these other things to make sure that it's hitting the metrics that you've set. I think that in that way, we are seeing a true convergence of performance display in the search-like performance.
But I think it's important to understand, though, that it's not exactly the same. You can apply similar metrics, but display is a lot different than search. The context is a lot different, especially in retargeting, where you're reaching a user with a creative element. It could be and should be personalized and dynamic and targeted, and it may not be based on their intent in that moment. You're reaching them maybe after they've conducted a search or raised their hand at a site. You're reaching them sometime in the future. What you communicate to them at that point is very important. And then what your goal is to get that person to convert ultimately. I think we would probably all agree with that. The goal is to get somebody to actually take an action. But if that action is a click, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to convert. And historically, impressions or view-throughs have been a metric that's been used to sort of augment the click. And it's difficult to measure because impressions don't always show up in a viewable area of the screen for a user. So if you buy campaigns based on impressions, sometimes you're buying, inventory that's never viewed by the user. And that poses a challenge when you think about how you pay and how you bid for inventory and then understanding the ROI.
Okay, and that's a really interesting point in terms of, what metrics can we put around the display and actually engaging with the user, and maybe it might be more relevant to video ads, for example, where they have to get the view through to watch the video and consume the content being shown to the user. So that's a more valuable purchase potentially for display advertisers. So James, you had something to add there?
I mean, the original question was, what are advertisers seeing and what are brands doing, and what we see is that, over the last year. So much has changed and so much continues to change. So we often find ourselves in a situation where we're selling search retargeting to a brand on the display side, and they'll end up introducing us to the client because they don't know enough, the people who are doing the display purchase, about search. So we end up talking to the client so that you've got this huge dichotomy in the market where clients tend to have a lot of information about search. It's tied in. The gentleman from Efficient Frontier on the previous panel was talking about how all this data is beginning to come together in a holistic manner. And so often for large brands, there's a big disconnect in the market between how they're purchasing display and how they're thinking about search. And all of that's coming together in one big thing. And I think all of us here at the panels, all of our products are evolving daily, weekly, monthly. And so what we're talking about today will be different in Q1, will be different in Q2, and you've got to continue to experiment with it and see it and tie it back into your search and tie it back into your tools that you've got on your website.
Right, and of course the ever-evolving, changing world of search and online marketing in general. So John, I didn't know if you wanted to continue down that path.
I think the one thing that we like to point out is the traditional measurements for display advertisement have been different. Right? They haven't necessarily been click-based or performance-based. And we're seeing a shift now that says it's okay to start measuring this by the same metrics that you have search. It's okay to start demanding payment on performance of people coming to the site. Now, your point that is well taken that not everybody's going to convert, but same is true of any performance, right? Not every search query converts, right? But I think when we look at this, it's very important to note that there is a very fundamental shift in how display is being measured, and that, to your point, it's not necessarily on view-through based. It's not necessarily on impression based because they do have fuzzy metrics around them. And we have already started to evolve. We're at this point where, hey, we can make these efficiencies at scale just based on the actual usage of the user and coming back to the site.
Mm-hmm. And do we think publishers have become advanced enough to really have a better understanding about their users coming in through search and how they can deliver better display products to them? I mean, are publishers getting to the point where they're sophisticated enough to?
That's
to
a great question. I think publishers, I think it's companies like, up here in the panel that are leading this charge. It's not necessarily publishers themselves, and they're playing a little bit of catch up when they're seeing these technologies evolve that have superior performance. And also, there's a little bit of fear on the publisher side when you say, well, I don't know if I can sell as much at the same performance metrics if I'm being measured by stricter criteria.
Anyone have any other comments on it? No.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all over the place. Publishers, some publishers have the resources to invest in it and are right on the bleeding edge, and other publishers are playing catch up.
Mm-hmm. And Tony, you kind of touched briefly on the creative aspect of performance display advertising. As an advertiser, or are advertisers really able to take advantage of shifting out display, the creative pieces enough, and are they learning enough? Because I think one of the big challenges, particularly in that long cookie window when somebody has been researching maybe a long conversion funnel product, like a big travel trip purchase, you're starting with the search data, and they're going through the process of searching and planning their Hawaii vacation, and then 2 months later I'm still getting ads for a Hawaii vacation, even though I've already taken the vacation. So how can advertisers really shift that creative to still keep messaging those users without being annoying and obnoxious?
We certainly made a lot of progress there in the last year and a half. Frequency capping, using cookies and technology that allow us to provide full recency. You can, with certain types of purchases, travel, for example, if somebody searches for a hotel room next week, you can sort of understand that it's not going to be valuable to reach them after that week. Right. That trip is probably come and gone. So we're getting better at that. I think we've done, we're getting really good at targeting users and identifying users who are either in market or who are now, we're moving further up the funnel with search retargeting. But now we're really, at least at MediaPost, we're really focused on serving the right content to the user at the right time. And with dynamic display, you have the ability to pull in from multiple, creative elements. For example, we might be able to determine that that person showed an interest in a specific gender of products. So maybe they only looked at men's clothing, yet that retailer might serve both men and women. In that case, we would understand it that that person has shown intent in only men's clothing, so we can create an ad dynamically for that user that has creative elements, the content, all the products, all the messaging for that specific gender. And then the more we know about that user, we might alter the messaging based on what we've seen them respond to in the past as well. So we are, and I would say collectively, all on this panel getting smarter and smarter every quarter in terms of how we leverage the data. But we can do some very amazing things when it comes to just what we serve and when we serve it.
Yeah.
Let's get started, James.
Yeah.
Yes, I would echo that and say that a lot of the burden of making that work properly is actually up here on the panel and not so much with the client, because and so the client needs to be vigilant in making sure that the ads are running in the way that they want them to run, but we've got the data, and so just like you, yeah. we're aging all of this stuff in real time, and if you search for flowers, we're not going to serve you another flower ad even tomorrow, but we will serve you another car ad. And so it really, it's up to us here to make sure that we have the data, we do the right thing, and as the advertiser, you've just got to police your vendors and make sure that they are delivering what you want. And there's not a tremendous amount other than maybe tying in with there are some good vendors here actually who do real-time creative optimization. Other than that sort of thing on the client side, there's not a lot more that you can do other than choosing the right vendor, such as Magnetic. So.
I want to echo what James was saying earlier. The data's there, right?
Of course. Criteo just endorsed Magnetic. You can put that up on the Twitter stream right there.
Uh-oh. Can I get the tape of this?
Yeah, seriously.
The data's there, and to the extent that you can use it, you're going to become a lot more efficient, right? And your example of getting advertisements for a vacation after you've already taken the vacation is a great one. If you have the data that says, look, I've looked at rooms for this specific date, we know, for example, we're not going to even target you up to 2 days before that, because by that time you've probably made your decision, right? So it's about having access to the data and being able to serve the relevant ads that are dictated by that data. The technology is already there. The capabilities are already there. It's really a question of gathering that from the advertiser.
Okay, interesting. And this sort of just kind of popped into my head based on some of the discussions around the previous panel. You know, is there a potential for social aspects to become a part of performance display, you know, and hopefully boost the return on engagement?
Yes, absolutely. But I think the value of social, at least today, well, let's talk about Facebook and social. You know, Facebook, unless you get users to download a social app, and it's kind of hard to do that at scale across multiple brands, you can't track what people do within Facebook and tie that cookie to what they're doing off of Facebook. Right. So understanding broad categories of the types of people on Facebook and what they do and how they interact with things, and letting that inform your optimization on display and search, I think is very valuable. And certainly you can track referral when somebody comes from Facebook and leaves Facebook's site, and understand they come from Facebook and visit your site and see what they do. I think it's extremely valuable to look at the social graph. It's just more difficult to do it on a user basis for retargeting purposes when we're talking about display.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I would just say that I would encourage anyone who's experimenting with both with social and retargeting to do it in 2 different campaigns. That it's, you know, social campaigns are great, but they are different, and that the way that you're going to run that campaign is different. And so running them side by side rather than to combine them into one thing, if you combine them together, you're likely to get a murky, less data-specific result.
Yeah, we've actually experimented putting a Facebook like button in ads. Great, it's out there, people have responded. What we have yet to get is an understanding of how valuable that is to the advertiser, right? And once we figure that out, how valuable is it to get a like, then you can incorporate that into the efficiencies. But until that point, I think it's going to be hard.
I think that's coming. We have the ability, as well, you mentioned in one of the tweets up there, talks about direct marketing, but I mean, it goes a little bit beyond direct marketing, what we're doing today. So in this example where you're able to include a like button in the creative, because we have the ability to partner with retailers and brands in a way where we can identify when the action that they're trying to create happens, we can tie when somebody interacts with an ad and clicks the like button within an ad. We can see how they eventually show up and convert, and we have the ability to see, you know, within certain Facebook applications when that user shows up as well. So we are starting to close that loop, and it's not all about just direct response or conversions. We have clients who pay us to support their brand, but it's defining what that metric is that's a success for them, and it might be as simple as help us get some likes. And then tell us, of those likes that you got, how many of them ever came to our site? And of those that came to our site, how many converted? And what was their average order? We can tell you all of that today. And I think it's very exciting how we're starting to leverage the multiple channels, tie it all together, and begin to really demonstrate true ROI around display, which is, you know, historically not been the case. So it's an exciting time to be pursuing performance display.
Right, and I think we'll probably, next year when we're back here at this time, we'll have seen a significant shift in exactly that, just as we did with likes versus links in social and search last year. Last year we were discussing that, and it hadn't yet happened as a ranking factor, and as we know, now it's pretty significant. So I think by a year from now, we'll see that pretty significantly. And to that point, I mean, I think you guys shared a number, 20% of display is running on social networks right now. 20% of spend. Do you have any prediction as far as how that might grow over the next year?
Well, if Facebook opens itself up to third parties, we're going to see a dramatic growth.
They do now on
the
ad
ad
exchange.
side,
I mean, you know, and that's actually one way where you can get a cookie on a user is by buying on Google's AdX and then seeing which users come from, the impressions are served on Facebook, because you can do impression level tracking if you're buying the display ads through the ad exchange. But it's hard to target. You can't specifically target Facebook, but you can kind of, after the fact, see how users are engaging and help that to inform. Sorry to cut you off.
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Well, I mean, it's kind of an interesting point because we've kind of talked about on the available display platforms, there's really no 800-pound gorilla just now. I mean, I think we make it sound a lot like Facebook controls a lot of it, but there seems like there's many other opportunities. Like, what are some of the other display network opportunities?
I think if you look across the board, I mean, we've got exchanges, we've got ad networks, and we've got direct publishers, right? It's very important if you're going to talk about scale in the performance display that you work across all three of them. If you're confined to just one of them, you're literally putting yourself in a bucket of about 20% at the top of what you could be getting. So it's when you look at across the board, there is no one source that you can tap into that will allow you to get the majority of your users in a performance fashion. You have to work across multiple providers.
And I just endorse that and just remind everyone how that works. So, for example, you'll get an ad network or an exchange that says, I've got publisher X's inventory, right? And you think, oh, great. So if I buy through this publisher, well, I've got publishers. But what you don't realize is that publisher X is actually exposing their inventory somewhere else as well. So even you absolutely, there is no other way to do it other than to make sure your campaign is running ubiquitously everywhere. Otherwise, especially with the way that whatever data it is you're crossing, whether it's site or search or social or whatever, you need to be able to have a way to cross-correlate that data with as much inventory as humanly possible. So you have to be plugged in absolutely everywhere, and no one has one place.
Completely. You can't just use impressions to measure whether or not you're reaching people, because you can go to any publisher page and scroll down the bottom of the page and see 5 ads that you were served and counted as an impression, but were never viewable to you. So when you talk about scale, it's a little fuzzy. You got to have some sense of whether or not that ad is actually showing up in a viewable area for that user. I think everybody, the great thing about scale today is that through the DSPs and exchanges and premium networks, we have a broad range of inventory sources. They all perform differently, and you should pay differently for each of them based on how they perform.
Here.
Really impact the bottom line. So sort of as maybe a secondary discussion to that, or maybe a more controversial one, the media inventory being turned into a commodity, essentially. What role is arbitrage playing in the performance display?
I'll tell you, that's the whole basis of our company is arbitrage, right? So we're out there buying inventory on a CPM basis primarily, almost entirely, and then we're selling on a post-click basis, right? So our entire $200 million business is based on that arbitrage of inefficiencies within the marketplace. I would say it's going to be extremely important. And as long as these inefficiencies exist, we're going to be able to continue to exploit them, right?
And that's not a bad thing for the industry. I mean, depending on our products and level of service, we do some arbitrage. We do some more percentage of media. And arbitrage for us could be, we actually don't do CPC, but if you're selling on a CPM basis or you're selling on a CPA basis, still arbitrage. It just depends on how you price it.
Yep.
But as the client that's buying media across multiple vendors, which I think we all agree, it all comes back to is it working for you? And if it is, both parties win. And that means you need to measure it and measure it appropriately, not only across your display buys, but also across your other buys as well. And within that ecosystem, if this is lift and it's profitable, then both parties are happy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, everyone in this business is in the arbitrage business. Even the agencies these days are with the trading platforms in the arbitrage business. So you just have to be aware of it. You have to know it. You have to not be surprised when you see it. Yeah.
You got to make sure you understand your ROI. If your vendor isn't transparent with you about how they're generating revenue for you, where they're generating it, then you just set yourself up to be taken advantage of. However, obviously the benefit is that we feel like we're really good at what we do, and it would be difficult for somebody to replicate the optimization techniques and algorithms that we've developed to deliver media to the right person, the right time, in the right way, with the right content in it. It's what we specialize in. So, yeah, there is a benefit. And I think, when you talk about, it's good for everybody. I think the publishers would argue, well, wait a minute, in this arbitrage space, if you're buying as cheaply as you can, we're the ones that are getting squashed a little bit. And some of that is true, but if the publisher does a good job of creating good inventory and then there's metrics to measure their individual performance, they're going to get paid a premium for it. We'll pay a premium for great inventory.
Well, and then they're bypassing the agency holders or the inventory holders, and then they're selling direct to the advertisers in that case. But I think there is some concern on the publisher side that the CPMs are dropping so significantly that they're not going to be able to command as great a rate. So
no, I would say that the exact opposite can be true, right? In that if you do have good quality, high performance inventory, we will pay more, and I think that's across the board, right?
Yeah, now if you're looking at it from the publisher's point of view, the publisher's got two things they've got to do, right? One, they've got to manage, an advertising business that looks like the offline business, right? Which is about branding, the big explosive things that they can do, and then they're going to have inventory that remains. They have to be very, very careful about which vendors they work with to sell that inventory, because there are thousands of people out there, and some of them are buying at a ridiculously low price and providing almost no value. And we've seen now publishers get really, really smart about this. Some of them have bought all of their inventory in-house. You see what Yahoo's done recently, and others are somewhere in the middle. And I think the successful publisher is going to be the one that says, I'm maximizing this branding stuff that I can do, and now I'm choosing a few people who I know are really good at what they do, and I'm letting them take a look at my inventory and give me good prices because I got good people on my site and I have good ad impressions. And we will all pay very high prices for stuff that converts.
Yeah, we'll pay. Today we pay for a user. I think we don't necessarily pay for inventory. So the publisher gets paid for creating an audience that's valuable. And that's puts a burden on them, but that's great. That's great development in our space.
Yeah, and I think that's a potential opportunity, absolutely. Yeah. But as far as data transparency is concerned, a lot of this high-value data is kind of held privately, so a lot of the advertisers are buying highly commoditized data. Where can you find the competitive edge if you're all using the same data essentially to?
Well, there are two types of data.
Yeah, I don't think anyone here uses the same data.
Okay, sorry.
Look at us all jumping in exactly the same thing.
Did I just hear her say we're all using?
No. Sorry, I phrased that for you. So, why don't you guys rephrase for me? I quit as moderator. Jeez.
So look, I think we all feel incredibly strongly about this. There are. I think the data landscape is sort of breaking into two kinds of people. There are people that you can go to where you buy prepackaged data, and more that data is commoditized, right? So if you are going to go and buy data as opposed to data plus media, then you should know that everybody's using that data, and you're probably not going to get a lot of lift from it. And then there are people who have ridiculously valuable data. Let's say we're all in that camp. But I would also put people like Amazon in that camp, and Google in that camp, and eBay in that camp. People who have unbelievably valuable data that we would all love to leverage. And that data is never going to be sold. Ever, ever, ever. Anyone who has valuable data is going to have an opportunity to make vastly more money by being smart about how they attach that data to media. And they're never going to trust anyone to do that for them, which is why you see this rabid reaction to your question from the panel. Like, God, no, no one else has my data except me. No one else has his data.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a good point. In fact, we were working with one advertiser recently that was selling its data to a third-party exchange. And we noticed this incredible trend that we weren't being very successful until we bought impressions at above a certain level for this particular advertiser. We couldn't figure it out. And we realized that because they were essentially selling their users to their competitors, right? Yeah. And so once we brought this to their attention, they said, oh my God, for the 10 cents I make on the sale of data, I'm missing out on $150 in my direct sale. They stopped doing that immediately because to that point, that commoditization of data was really hurting their business. In that sense, I think we're all aligned in saying that data is not something that's a long-term value proposition for a lot of these advertisers. They want to have the users and the sale. They don't want to necessarily get that incremental 10 cents on the.
It makes perfect sense from a business point of view.
Yeah.
Well, your most valuable data is your own first-party data, period. And then everything you do is an extension off of that. We've had very little success with third-party commoditized data sources. And when we use those sources to try to create lookalike segments, we've actually, it's interesting how when we send users to a third party to say create a lookalike segment, and they send them back to us, and we do our own cookie mapping, it's like 95% of the same people. It's almost just like truly. So it's almost like cookie laundering, effectively.
That's good.
Cookie laundering, new term.
Which is for us is just doesn't make any sense. So we have our own audio extension programs. We haven't seen much value at all in the third-party data sources. Your own data is the most valuable commodity you have, which means you need to be smart about using it yourself and be smart about not giving others access to it.
It should be viewed as incremental, not core, right? I mean, if you in our case, if we're delivering a 20 to 1 ROI for a client on a performance display campaign and they're excited about it, the very next conversation we have is, I want to do more. How do I do more? And because in the retargeting space you're dealing with a limited pool of users, the next step is to broaden the audience a little bit. And you can do that with search data. You can do it with email-related data. And so how you sort of progress up the funnel into sort of more prospecting as opposed to harvesting, the data can be valuable, but it's incrementally valuable, and it's not something that in terms of performance marketing has been proven to be in and of itself super valuable. Does that help?
No, it does. It does. Helps me, certainly. I'm too afraid to look at that screen. I'm just not going to do it. Stop looking. Let me distract you completely. And I just think we'd be remiss to not talk about this in some form. And we didn't previously have this discussion, but performance display in mobile devices, tablets, smartphones. Where's the opportunity in that right now? Because to me, it seems like a natural fit for in-app advertising. It just makes sense. People are already engaged with the app. They're an avid user, and then performance display can be served directly to their highly targeted users.
Well, for a little bit of a background, we started as really just a dynamic ad vendor. So we were all about interactive ads, MediaForge's background. And when we first started running retargeting campaigns, the Facebook inventory was open to us. And it performed very well because the environment was engaging to begin with. So we tracked a lot of engagements within that environment and reached a lot of relevant people in a timely manner. It was very effective for us. Apps are the same way. And now as the challenge I think going forward is the multi-screen. I think we can reach people on iPads, we can reach them on their mobile devices, but tying together their desktop, iPad, and iPhone and Android device is really the future of how we deal with it. So it's a multi-screen approach, and that's emerging now.
Okay. You talked about next year what we'll be talking about in this space, and that multi-device tracking is going to be, everybody in this room and in the industry is going to see how critical that is a year from now as adoption of the third and fourth screen explodes.
I echo that.
Yeah. So we echo. So we have actually stayed away from the mobile and tablet space. If you remember the presentation yesterday by a guy from Google, he showed how much of the inventory was taken up by the paid search at the top of the space. So in display, it's very I have yet to see a really terrific user experience on a mobile device and a tablet that is standard display units that I can go and get at scale. So I've seen some good implementations, but I haven't seen them at scale enough to apply the data to it and to get really, really meaningful results. I can get little bits of results, but to drive lots and lots and lots of new clients down the funnel to my customers, we haven't seen a place where we can plug into enough to get that inventory. And until that happens, and I think that inventory is going to be different from the way it is on the web, we're going to sort of continue to watch and wait. And the second that reaches the threshold where we can really drive scale, we'll be there. But we're not there yet.
I agree. I agree completely with James.
See, I would just, as a contrarian view, I would just think that some of the major publishers, like the Flipboards and the New York Times, and all this, I would argue that they have some of the volumes, and of course that's just more of a gut
But they're not
reaction
exposing their inventory on any exchanges or any way that I can apply the data to it. So it's a good experience for a branding point of view. And again, go back to that idea where publishers have to go do two things, right? Go do their branding, sell their branding campaigns, and then do their data data stuff, but the data part of it, because it's not standard, you know, there are standard placements on the web which creates great scale, and until you have, and that's why we're seeing all of the retargeting resurgence in the last couple of years, is because finally there's scale and there's marketplaces and there's exchanges and there's ways to go and buy the data, because the technology was available 5-10 years ago, but it's only now that it's available at exchanges and widely enough so that you have enough places to apply the data. And so yes, there is stuff there, but none of that inventory is driven by data, and so we just can't buy it.
Okay, makes sense. No, I think, do we want to open up for questions for about 5 minutes? Does anyone have a question for the panelists? Okay. Bailey Mungavin.
Hey, well, first of all, quick question for John. You just got to put this to bed for me. Is it Criteo or Criteo?
Oh.
In the U.S., it's Criteo. In Europe, it's Criteo.
All right, got it.
All right. So know
We'll
your
pick up
audience.
the phone to either one.
So,
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, sure. So,
And it's MediaPost.
Adobe.
Magnetic.
So I can think of a number of kind of threats to the arbitrage business, which you guys are all in. I don't think it's going away necessarily, but just curious from your perspective, what's the #1 biggest threat to the arb business, and like how are you going to pivot to adjust to it?
So if I'm telling you our business or our business specifically?
You guys are basically marking up media. I'm curious what you see as the threat to that markup, and then how are you going to react to it?
So I would say we're not marking up, or at least not Criteo, right? We're actually taking the inefficiencies and exploiting them. So we're buying. No,
We mark it up.
there is, because our clients are not paying. Our clients are not paying on a CPM basis, right? And we're not going out and buying on a CPM plus 10% or 15%, right?
Where's
There's a
the
difference.
when you need them?
But if you look at, I think, the way that inventory is being sold today on publishers, there's a huge delta between the premium price that brands pay and then the run of network, right? If you can pay more than the run of network, you're going to get more inventory than the traditional side. And if you can start paying CPMs close to what you get on the branded side, you're going to get very high quality, huge amounts of inventory available. I think when you start seeing those numbers go up, that's when you're going to start seeing significant volume, and that's what we've seen across a number of publishers. We can start competing against those brand dollars in the CPM business. Now, what we're doing is we're doing this on a user basis. So we're not buying this in wholesale bulk impressions. You know, I need to get 500 million across these publishers within a month. I'm buying against users, so that allows us to become a lot more efficient in the spend than just buying across the board on an impression-only basis.
So I have a fairly boring answer to that question, which is that what's going to happen is, more and more, display is the fastest growing part of digital media, and more dollars are flowing into it, and not every piece of inventory is created equal. So brands, although you can gather data from many places, where you're prepared to have your media run is actually relatively limited. And so as more money flows into the space, and as the limited amount, as finally inventory starts to get limited, then the arbitrage will start to get squeezed, and the only people who win will be the people who can actually drive success for the customers. And that, so what are we paranoid about? We're paranoid about being the most efficient way that you can possibly buy, which is why we stick only to search data, because we think all of the other data is going to be successful, but slightly less successful than search.
Okay, Billy seems satisfied. Okay, question in the back.
I think this is mainly a question for Roger and Tony, but if a client came to you and said, we want you to do performance display for us, but we already have another retargeting vendor, can you hit the same ROI that we get in search?
No.
Maybe.
I believe that
Yeah,
was
we-
Tony.
Yes.
I echo that.
So, I mean, I'm gonna answer to you that the answer to that is that most, display, if you look at the raw numbers of performance, is not going to be as efficient as search, but it might be cheaper, and so the actual amount that you pay can be more efficient because you can buy it more cheaply. So it depends, which is why I said maybe.
But it can. I mean, it absolutely can. And when we bring on a client and that we're buying media for them on a cost per action basis, and we're already managing them on search, we start with the search ROI as our target. And then we'll work with the client to say, you can drive more. If you increase it, what do you want your trade-offs to be? But, you know, especially for retargeting focus campaigns, we do some other things as well. I think in a fully attributed basis, and you're smart about your media buying, and you think about buying display in a portfolio like we've talked about, you can absolutely hit the same ROI as search.
Yeah. If you don't, we don't attribute view-through or impressions in any of our performance marketing, or we don't charge for it anyway. The client may choose to attribute some of it, some portion of it, but we have case study data that's readily available online where we have clients that are saying we're outperforming their search. Their paid search.
I would agree. I mean, this can be as effective as search, right? And it's the question really comes down to, is this effective enough at these levels at a scale that's significant enough for the clients? And we're seeing that increase every day.
And I think the key thing to always remember, it's going to vary vertical to vertical, product to product. You know, is it a commodity pricing, the product that people are searching for? If people are just price comparison shopping on the latest HGTV, then maybe no, performance display is not going to return that same ROI. But potentially in a more unique brand opportunity, it can.
Yeah, if an e-commerce company is only converting 2% of their traffic to start with, it can be a challenge. So there is, if we're operating on a performance basis, there is still a little bit of burden on the e-commerce company to do a good job of converting the traffic that we drive back, and that poses a challenge as well.
Okay. One more question real quick? Okay.
I have one. You know, one of the challenges with retargeting, as we know from search data, there's a certain latency between a visit to a site and a conversion anyway. You know, some folks are going to convert same session, others are going to kick around a little bit, visit some other sites, do some comparison shopping, and come back later to buy. Knowing what the real value of retargeting is, you know, if you take credit for impression base, you get credit for every person who left the site and then came back later to convert, which is obviously ridiculous. But, you know, are you guys doing control tests with public service announcements to see what the actual lift is versus?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we do it. That's part of our like a consultative attribution modeling process for every client, especially when we're managing the display and not just the search. We'll take a set percentage, 10-20% of the media across the board, deliver. For us, it's usually other clients, non-competitive ads, just so we can get the best use out of the media. But instead of PSA, you know, but yeah, you know, absolutely, and that really helps because a lot of clients have the same concern, and it's a valid one. But impressions do have value. You know, views absolutely have value, and it's the only real way to really measure with a control set to see what happens.
We use engagement as a metric, so I think it's one difference between our companies. And I know we work with Ignition on some of your campaigns to provide this level of analytics, but the idea being that if we can track how a user engages content within the ad, so if they watch a video or they do a search or they browse products or scroll through products, and we can track all that, then we can prove that it was seen. So you don't really have to worry about the impression argument, because we can prove that it was seen and it influenced the user. And then if they return within a certain period of time, you've got a pretty good argument for saying we influenced that. And I think that's, you know, for us, that's and I think we all are sort of held to that standard of having to be able to run holdback groups and demonstrate that we're creating an incremental lift. And you know, any vendor that you choose to run performance display should do that for you. I think we would all agree with that.
Yeah. I'd say that your question is an advertisement for why you need to work with someone to help you with the buy, because it's an art, not a science. There's just no way that you can rely on technology to give you the absolute black and white answer to that. And you'll always have vendors like us crying and screaming, saying, "No, we were doing better attribution than you say we were." And you need to have someone looking across all of the buys with some impartial look at it to say, you know, you know, here's what they're saying and here's what we're seeing, and we think based on our past history, this is what it's going to be, because it is an imprecise science, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'll actually say we have done a lot of these A/B tests, just as you described them. Clearly, very demonstrable lift in the campaigns that we're able to prove. What's interesting, though, is the majority of our clients don't ask for it. And there are vendors that do on this kind of offer this as a basis for actually payment. The reason I think most don't ask for it is because they see the dollars in their cash register pretty significantly. Now, whether they're seeing 100% of what we claim or 80% or 120%, that is where kind of you can get into arguments, and a PSA test might be very important, but the incremental lift is there.
But you're selling on a CPC as
CPC.
well, so it's not as relevant for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that's kind of a discussion that's going to continue over, you know, as we get more sophisticated with attribution modeling. So I think we're actually totally out of time, though. Oh, one more. Sorry.
Question for the panel. In your opinion, should there be an industry norm and standards for conversion windows? And in your opinion, is there a big difference between 7, 14 versus 30 days?
It depends
Great
on the
question.
client and the industry. Yeah. I don't think there can be a norm. You know, you use the example of buying flowers versus buying a car. Yeah. You know, as the most dramatic example you can come by. But even within industries, people have different promotions and different types of sales, and it really, unfortunately, I wish there was a better answer. Unfortunately, it's really a consultative client-by-client process that we work with them to find the right mix.
Yeah.
I'd agree. That's why you earn your dollars right there.
Right,
Yeah.
Okay, good. That was an easy question there. I'll agree. So with that, let's thank you, our panelists. Thank you to MediaPost. So thank you.
Hey, yeah. Is Paul here? Paul Borselli from Cravario? Paul, you're going to do this real quick.